welcome to the FTN and OptixEQ Belmont Stakes special. We had so much fun doing the Derby one that I had to get John and Emily to come back here and talk with me again for the last leg of the Triple Crown here, the Test of Champions at Belmont Park. It's going to be Saturday, what do we got here? June 5th, I think, right? That would be the date here this Saturday. Saturday, June 5th at Belmont Park in beautiful New York. Not really the greatest part of New York. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've been to Belmont quite a few times. It's a lot of traffic on Belmont Day. Never a fun thing to get there. It's always better to take the train if you can. So anybody who wants to go watch it, that is the one piece of advice I will throw out there for you. But you guys did not come here to see me talk about horses. You came here to see these two talk. So we'll start with Emily. How are you doing today? How is everything? How's life been? What's going on?
Everything's good. I'm really looking forward to this day. I mean, the Belmont race itself is an exciting race. It's really deep. Looking forward to talking through that. But the rest of the card is really exciting. It's a good menu of cards. We got 13 races, a little bit of everything. So, yeah, looking forward to the day. We're recording here on Thursday, so still a few days out. But, yeah, looking forward to that. Everything is good.
John, how about you, my man? How you been? How is everything?
Oh, I'm terrific, and it's great for the Belmont. A little historical factoid. You know, the Belmont wasn't run at Belmont until like 1905. It was run at some Bronx tracks. So, you know, that's where I grew up. Belmont was my home track growing up. I love it. It's very unique, and it's a unique race. Looking forward to it. And the undercard's pretty cool because I think there's a lot of vulnerable favorites on the undercard. So beware.
Ooh, that's going to be good. So we can get some nice vertical wagers going there and make some good money. Yeah, so as you guys know, like we did for the Derby, we're going to be doing the same thing here for the Belmont. You know, at OptixEQ, they put together a PDF for all these big race days, and we're going to be offering their PDF over on FTN Bets. So you guys can get over to FTN Bets. You'll find it over there. It will be all over social media if you're looking for it. $24.99 is the price. Is that still the price, John? I just want to make sure before I tell it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep, $24.99 is the price. I can tell you guys right now, they go through every single one of the races. They break down who the favorites are, whether the favorite is vulnerable, whether it's one you should be betting against, whether it's one you should just be singling and moving on to the next race. A lot of good information there, especially if you're going out there to put some money and try to make some money this weekend. A lot of good information that they put in there. It is well worth the $25 if you're going to do any serious wagering on the Belmont. And I will say this, I mean, as much as everybody likes to bet on the big race that's on TV, they've both mentioned it here. There are a lot of undercard races that are going to lead up to that as well. And there's a lot of value to be had in some of those races too, because you don't have as many people going and doing shows like this where you're breaking down all the horses for it. So if you have that information that other people don't have for the other 12 races on the card, it's even more valuable there. So definitely make sure you guys get over to FTN Bets and, pick up that PDF and, support all of them for coming on our show and giving you guys some good information. So anyway, let's get into the nitty gritty of what we're here to talk about with the Belmont Stakes here. It is called the Test of Champions. It is run at 1.5 miles. It is a distance 12 furlongs that many of these horses will never run again, and none of these horses have ran before up to this point in their life. So let's start with that. John, we'll start with you here. What is the distance challenge that these horses face today, and how do you as a handicapper kind of grade that and say, hey, this horse maybe has the pedigree to make it, or I've seen this horse run at 1.125 miles and close up well? Like, what are the things that kind of get you to say this is a horse that can get 12 furlongs, or in the opposite side of it, this is a horse that can't get that distance?
Right. Yeah, in optics, we watch all the races, and really it's visual more than pedigree. I mean, pedigree is not something we kind of follow. It's once a horse is established what he is, what type of horse he is, we really rely on our visuals from race to race and see how horses evolve and develop. And we'll get into this in the Belmont. There's a couple of horses that we think might be able to stretch out, with this 1.5 miles and do better than probably their form indicates. So it's really a visual with us. The stride, and we look at horses, we look at the gallop out of races, and get a really assessment of can this horse really get the distance? We look at the way the horse is built, those types of things. It's 1.5 miles is just like you said, so unique. The horses just don't do it. They're really not bred to do it anymore. So you really got to, there's not a lot of horses that kind of stand out at this distance, even physically anymore. So it's just something you got to watch for. So it's really visual, Benny, for us.
So Emily, how about for you? What are some of the challenges that come with betting on the Belmont that we don't have on a lot of the other race days that we're betting on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're kind of, tailing off on that is the distance, because the distance is unique and it's those horses that are going to get that distance. It'll take a level of stamina, it'll take a level of class, it's going to take a level of form, it's going to take a level of speed. And so all those factors, and I think that's kind of the benefit of optics, is that we're really looking at the horse itself, the horse driven, where a lot of the noise will come from aspects like the pedigree, which is, I mean, about as reliable as like reading a horoscope. And so us having the information as far as who these horses are, where they are in their form cycle, how much they've improved coming into this race, and then bringing in some of the trainer stuff, because there are certain trainers that can get a horse to run long, can get horses to perform at this level. So I think those are the challenges that are a little bit unique in this race, that at least for the other races on the card, we don't have as much kind of just unknown work ahead of us.
All right, so now that we lost the 5 people out there who love astrology that are no longer going to watch right now. But other than that, I think everything Emily said is right on point, and that is definitely something that, like you said, it's something that is noise, and that's what we're trying to get rid of here. We want to have the information, and that's why I love working with you guys over at OptixEQ, because you're very data driven, you're very analytically driven, the same way we try to be over at FTN Bets. So we're not giving you the noise that everybody else is giving you, the stuff that people are going to be talking about on the radio. Oh, his dad won the Derby, or his father won the Belmont 10 years. You know what? None of that. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter at all, but it's not something that, the data shows is a reliable predictor of future success. And that's really what we want to do, is find the things that are reliable predictors of the future success. And one of the things that is usually a reliable predictor of future success, I just said that 4 times in a row there, is the optics plot that you guys have here. So John, we're going to throw the optics plot up on the screen here. Why don't you explain a little bit about A, what the optics plot is first off, and then B, what we're seeing out of it for this race?
Sure. The optics plot is a pace tool. And basically what it does is kind of lays out horses based on their past performances, and our algorithm uses various races in their past performances to come up with how they plot. And they plot on this quadrant, and it'll tell you like which horses are speed horses, which horses are mid-pack horses, which horses are closers, and it kind of lays it out relative to one another, so you get an idea which horse may have an advantage or an edge. And so that's what it is. And when you're looking at if you're looking at it right now, you can see there's some header information. You have a thing called a plot fit. And what this is this tells us how good or bad the plot is in terms of a fit. Sometimes when you bring all these different horses, it may not fit the right. Now, the reason why it's red here, and it's kind of a bad thing, is because all these horses are trying a mile and a half for the first time. So typically you would say, this plot I would want to pass. You don't want to pass this plot, because the horses that do have, that we plot are plot perfectly on a diagonal here. And that is a very good, what I would say, a very true plot. So the plot is really good, and so we should really rely on it here as we analyze this race. So
Emily, go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, Emily, we talked a little bit about the profile of the Derby winners in the past and where they come from in terms of speed and stalker or closer and, all those things. Is there anything with the Belmont that is the same way? Are there certain horses that we want to give a little more credence to because of their running style, or certain horses that we want to, kind of tick down because of the way that they run?
We haven't really found any track profiles in terms of like the plot results going in there. So we're kind of using more of today's data. So John mentioned it as far as the plot today. We have the standard plot and the surface distance, and the standard plot is current form. So we're going to kind of rely on that as far as being a pace tool and looking at how the race shape is going to play out. And then certainly you can tell between the circles and squares. The squares are horses that have more finishing ability than the circles. And this is in relation to each other. So I think, as far as you're asking, like a plot trends versus, the Derby, it is a little bit different. One, because of the distance itself, and then the timing as well. These horses coming back in a short period of time, which is also something that's not too common in modern horse racing.
Yeah, so John, let's talk about that a little bit before we actually get into the horses. 25 or so years ago, if you had a Triple Crown horse, that horse was running in the Derby, in the Preakness, and in the Belmont pretty much every single time. If you got into the race, you were running them there. This year, when we look at the Belmont field, we have 5 horses that ran in the Derby. We have 2 horses that are wheeling back from the Preakness, and we only have 1 new shooter that's coming in, Overtook, who's coming in off his Peter Pan race the last time out. how has that changed, or do you think this is a good change? Like, what do you think that does for the sport and everything overall? That instead of having the same horses running out all the time, really in no other point in their racing career, unless they're dropping into like low-level claimers at some random track somewhere, and they're running back every 2 weeks. At no other point the horses run back usually this quickly. So do you think there's an advantage to the horses that ran in the Derby and took the 5 weeks in between to run in the Belmont versus the ones that ran in the Preakness 3 weeks ago and are now wheeling back now? Or do you think that, really it just kind of comes down to the horse and the trainer and the regiment that they put them all through?
Yes to both. But no, I think the horses that are coming back quicker, have a disadvantage over the horses that took the Preakness off. And I think, Benny, the reason why this is things have changed with the Derby, right? You have the qualifiers now, which took all like the old speed horses out of the race. So the Derby has become much more formful over the years than it used to be. And then I think the other thing is this emphasis in sports and everything in life now is to win now at all costs. And I think trainers want a better opportunity to have a better win percentage than lose percentage, right? Because I guess that's how they judge each other. That's how owners judge them. So this emphasis to win versus kind of develop horses. Like racing used to be like an aristocratic game. People understood that. They put their money down. They didn't really look to get a big return on it. They just got into the game because it was, just something that they, right? So I think
when you have that much money, what else are you going to do with it? Right?
It didn't matter, right? It didn't matter if they took a loan. They weren't doing it solely for making a profit. But things have changed, and it's a business. And so I think that's why things kind of evolve. People don't want to put losing streaks up there, right? Trainers don't want to do it, and owners don't want to do it. And so I think that's kind of why it's evolved to some extent too.
Yeah, I mean, even us as bettors don't want to do it. We don't want to be going on a long losing streak as well. You only have so much capital to use right there, so you got to deploy it in the right way. So Emily, how about you? I'll give you the same question. Do you think this is a positive for the sport, a negative for the sport? Is this something that you think is a movement that should go? We won't even get into the question of whether or not they should start stretching out the Triple Crown races, because I don't want all the diehard old school people to start yelling at us about changing everything around here. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm one of those that I like more competition in the races. So personally, it's not, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a change. Everything's a little bit different kind of year to year, still kind of sorting it out. And we'll see how that comes out. But again, I mean, I'm a proponent of competitive races, full fields. I think it makes it more interesting for us as handicappers and bettors. Having those fuller fields, you get, different aspects of horses in terms of their form cycle and how that dictates the race shape. And then, as we get into like today's race and we start talking about these horses, and you have some horses that it's like, they're logical only because they're just happen to be better than the rest, right? But it's not necessarily a horse that you're like, this horse is like the Belmont winner. Like a lot of times you can kind of see leading up to the season, you're like, maybe not for the Derby, slower developing type, but looks like a Belmont horse. And it's just like, I don't feel like we have that this year. So I think with the changes, if some of that goes away, it's a little bit of a bummer.
So you said something interesting here with, looking at this race, and there are certain horses in this race that look like they're just better than other horses. And that was something that I noticed when I was going through the handicapping as well. Even if you watch the race replay, and I'll tell everybody here, if you're going to bet on the Belmont, you can go on YouTube right now and just type in Kentucky Derby 2021, Preakness 2021, and watch the replay of those races, because a lot of those horses are running back here. And there's going to be a couple questions that I ask our experts here about that race and the way that it was run and the way that some of these horses ran, when we talk about whether or not they'll be able to wheel back in the Belmont, or whether they're, like Emily said, some of those horses that when you look at it, they're just not as good as some of the other horses that are here. And one thing I'm going to give you guys a lot of credit for here is the first horse we're going to talk about here. So we have 8 horses only in this race, so we probably won't talk as long as we did for the Derby when we had 20. But one horse we did talk about in the Derby was Bourbonic. And this was a horse that won the Wood Memorial. When we did the Derby show, we talked about how we thought that was probably the weakest of all the prep races. And you guys were absolutely right on that, because when the Derby came, he was nowhere to be found. I think he finished 13th, if I'm not mistaken, on there. So he was nowhere near the front of that race. So let me ask this question. We'll start with you here, John. We were obviously right about Bourbonic and the Kentucky Derby. Is he able to turn the tides here, or is this one of those horses that you guys were talking about that just seems to be a step behind some of the other ones?
Yeah, I think he's a step behind. He's just too slow. I mean, like if you're just comparing his speed figures to the rest of the horses, he would really need to step up, and everyone else would need to regress. So, and I don't necessarily believe like the mile and a half is going to help him, even though he's kind of you would think, well, he's a deep closer and he can close. Really, that's not been a good profile for Derby, the Belmont winners, those deep closers. So, yeah, this is a horse I just have trouble with, really giving him any kind of a legitimate chance to win this race.
Emily, your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I just think he's a little bit below. I think overall there is some upside with him as a horse. I mean, as you talk about replays, you go back to the Derby. It's not like he had a clean trip in there. So certainly has upside off that trip. But then it just comes down to like, is this the right spot for him to show it? And it's a little bit tougher spot for him. And then John mentioned the running style. So it's like, I'm not going to fight anybody that wants to use him for an underneath spot, but he's a really tough horse, impossible to kind of push in the 1-2 spots.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask you guys. Is this a horse that, because of that late style, maybe gets up for a piece here at the end, but probably somebody that you're not putting on the top of any of your tickets?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting an underneath spot is going to be not necessarily a case of him like closing ground, like really like giving a big kick late, but more kind of just grinding and passing tires. So you'd be playing more for that scenario, in my opinion.
John, same thoughts for you?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of grinders that are better than him. Maybe the other Fletcher. So we'll talk about him later. So there might be a better opportunity than him for the underneath spots.
All right, so let's move on to a horse that I really want to talk about here. I think he's actually the morning line favorite, if I'm not mistaken. I saw him at 2-1, Essential Quality here. Winner of the Grade 3 Southwest at Oaklawn, winner of the Grade 2 Bluegrass at Keeneland, and then came back and ran fourth in the Derby. But here's the question that I had for you guys. When I watched that race, around the first turn, I think he went 4 wide. When they were coming down in the stretch around the last turn, I think he wound up going 3 wide to kind of come home there. And then as they were coming down in the stretch, he kind of veered out a little bit to the side and then had to kind of get put back on task. But when you watch the end of that race, it looked like he was actually picking up a little bit of ground on Hot Rod Charlie, even though that he was, a couple lengths behind that one when they finished and a couple lengths behind the winner as well. So you look at Essential Quality here. I think, the morning, the odds makers kind of saw a lot of the same things that we saw with the Derby there because they made him the 2-1 morning line favorite. Is this a deserving favorite? Is 2-1 too short of a price on this horse? Or do you guys think that this is the horse to beat? We'll start with you on this one, Emily.
Again, it's sort of what I was saying earlier. There's certain horses that are just sort of better than the others. And he's kind of just one of those horses by default because he has the Grade 1 wins. You kind of just, excuse the Derby. It was like a blanket finish for the minors. There's really not much between him and Hot Rod Charlie, as you mentioned. So I think it's his overall resume, which is kind of playing more into the morning line than necessarily the Derby itself. And he did have that wide trip, was a little bit less than ideal. And I kind of thought overall, we talked about it in the Derby video, where he might have just been a little bit over the top going into the Derby, on that quicker turnaround with those hard races under his belt. So I thought all things considered, he ran a good race. He's been rested. He's coming into this race. And he's just kind of one of those horses. We had the plot up. He plots well. He's a square in quadrant 1. He has the class. He has the speed figures. So he's logical. He's the logical favorite. Is he a horse that's exciting at 2-1? Or one that you just feel like he's a cinch and you feel really confident making him the anchor on the ticket? I don't quite have that confidence level, but I can respect him as a favorite in this race. John, how do you feel on that?
Yes, but I don't think he's going to be 2-1. I mean, if he's not 6-5, I'd be surprised. I mean, he was 5-2 in the Derby, and it was a 20-horse field, okay, which was a much more difficult field than this. He was like 1-2 in the Bluegrass, and he destroyed Bauer in that race. So I can't see this horse not being like 6-5, 7-5. I'd be surprised if he's not. Again, every time a horse is doing something they are for the first time, it's hard to take a short price on him. But I would think 2-1 would be a gift on him. I'll be honest with you. But we'll see. That's just my opinion. He just seems to be. He's got the resume. All the things you guys said about the Derby. It just seems like the logical horse. Again, he plots very well. I mean, any kind of pace scenario where some of those horses up front, he can probably just stalk them and make the one run, and he's a legitimate favorite.
So John, let me ask you this question here with this horse. So, obviously one of the most important things in horse racing is what the price is that we're getting on these horses, right? Like there are horses that you like. If this horse went off at 5-1, I would be taking out a second mortgage on my house to put it on him. If this horse goes off at 1-5, I don't want to touch him at that kind of a price there. So around where do you think the fair value is for this horse that if you saw him surprisingly starting to creep up on the board, you'd be like, all right, now we gotta unload the clip on it. And where do you think the price is that it's like, if he's below this number, I'm going to try to beat him?
Okay, I think 8-5 is a fair price on him. So anything below like 6-5 or below, I'm not necessarily would bet against, but I probably use him in like a trifecta because I have some other opinions. So I may look at a different kind of wagering pool based on that. But he's a horse that I think is most likely first or second place finisher in this race.
All right, so there you go. Essential Quality, definitely one of the ones that you guys should be looking at here. Definitely one of the ones that has a big chance to hit the board and make some noise in this race. Another horse that's going to be a short price is the one that you mentioned that he beat in the Bluegrass in Bauer. Bauer came back last time, won the Preakness. This is a horse that has shown the ability to close from behind. Now, Emily, you mentioned a little earlier here that horses that close from behind aren't necessarily the ones that do the best when you're talking about the Belmont and getting up to win here. So what are we looking at with this horse here? I mean, he had a really good pace to run at in the Preakness. Those other two horses kind of went head to head, maybe tired each other out a little bit. Then when they came around that last turn, he just, put on that extra gear and kind of went by both of them. Do you think he's going to have that kind of a pace to run at here? Do you think that race, I think you guys had this as a red one in your breakdown. And whenever you see red, that usually means that, you guys are a little suspect on, what the horse did there for one reason or another. So let's start there. Why did you guys have this horse as a red coming out of the Preakness? And what do you think his chances are here in the Belmont?
I guess it's has to be just in terms of trip. I mean, we haven't plotted in, again, this is standard, so current form. In quadrant 1, he's kind of like splitting like quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So he's not necessarily a deeper closer in this race and did have a very favorable trip. And that's where the red keywords that you're mentioning, the tactics plus. So it was a very good ride, putting the horse in position, and then got a perfect trip from there for the reasons that you mentioned. He was inside, which is where you wanted to be that day at Pimlico. He was able to save ground, and then he got the setup just with those horses tiring. And I think there's kind of an overall, I don't necessarily want to bring this up like quite yet, but just in terms of like how strong was the Derby itself, right? So he ran by those horses that ran in the Derby, Medina Spirit, Midnight Bourbon. And was kind of, that was the race for Bauer, right? Because maybe people don't know this, maybe it's not common knowledge, but the El Camino Real over at Golden Gate Fields is a win and you're in for the Preakness. So it's like this race was mapped on the calendar for this horse, kind of regardless. Got the right trip, got the right setup, was coming into the race the right way. And so now he's going to have to come around on a quick rest, 3-week turnaround, for the race that he was prepped for last out and compete with these other horses. And, last time out, he was a great price and probably just going to be much shorter than that today, especially in this shorter field.
John, how about you? Do you think Bauer can take down a second jewel of this Triple Crown, or is this a horse that you're probably going to be betting against?
I'm betting against, and for all the reasons Emily said, the perfect trip. The other thing is he ran his highest optics figure ever, so I think there's going to be some regression there. He got the perfect trip. The other thing is, like Emily says, you want to take a horse that maybe he's going to be 6-1, 7-1, 8 to whatever, who was 24-1 versus Essential Quality like 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago. I don't. And again, I mean, I don't know how you look at this, but his win jockey is gone, right? He went to ride another horse in this race. So I don't know how you're going to kind of evaluate that. And I haven't watched the works, but I noticed his works, at least from a raw time, have really kind of regressed. That one work he had regressed pretty significantly since but maybe he didn't need it. Maybe it was just a maintenance work, but it was just something that I noticed. So I'm going to, just because, mainly because if we think he's going to be in that 6 to 8 to 1 range, I'm going to be playing against him.
Now, is that where you think he's going to be? Because on the morning line, they have him way lower than that.
Yeah, I think the morning line, I think Essential Quality is going to be lower. So, that the money's got to go elsewhere. It's got to go elsewhere. So, yeah, I really don't see it. But hey, things surprise me. And if And if that's the case, they surprise me. That's good for me, I guess, if I'm right.
All right, so there we go. So we're gonna go on. We're gonna talk about the next horse here. And John, I think this was one that you liked in the Derby. So we'll start with you here. 7-2 on the morning line. Hot Rod Charlie, winner of the Louisiana Derby, finished a little bit ahead of Essential Quality in the Kentucky Derby. He took the show money for third. What are you looking at here with Hot Rod Charlie? Do you think he's got a big chance?
He's got a chance, and I think he could probably maybe get a good trip. He's going to have to pass horses in the stretch, which that's going to be interesting if he can do that. Notice that he gets Pratt back, so he gets Pratt, who was on the Bauer. So I guess that's a positive. He's top California rider. I don't necessarily love him at a mile and a half, but he's kind of got that style where he's going to be close up. So, as they're mixing it up, maybe he can kind of slip in, maybe he can grind to a win. It's not like a horse, like I said, oh my God, this is the horse, that I have to have, right? But I think, fair value on him. Let's see, I'm looking maybe maybe 5-1 would be kind of my fair value on him. So that's what I would be looking at. He's got a chance, but he's got to beat Essential Quality, and I think the Sadler horse also.
So Emily, how about you? How big a deal do you think it is? John mentioned it twice now that, the jockey who basically won a Triple Crown race on one of the other horses, who is also running in this race, has decided to ride this horse instead. Is that something that factors heavily into your handicapping, or how do you view when you see something like that?
On the day-to-day, I think it's situational, but I think in a case like this, I think there is a little bit more weight to it because these races are such high profile, especially if you won one of the Triple Crown races and finished in the money and the other, and you take the one that finished in the money over the winner. I think it does say something, and maybe that was something that was already planned, but again, they could have adjusted at some point. So I think there is some stock in it with Pratt deciding to ride Hot Rod Charlie over Bauer.
Yeah, and again, we've seen things like this happen before. Like, for example, I know Johnny V used to ride basically every Fletcher horse that came out, and there were some times where he would be on a winner for somebody else, but the next race that horse came back, if there was a Fletcher horse on it, he would hop off. And with a situation like that, I never used to give it as much credit as I do when it's another jockey who doesn't have that. I'm the first call for this trainer on every horse that he has and stuff like that. This doesn't seem to be one of those situations, though. So that's why I give it a lot more credence because, again, jockeys get a percentage of whatever the horse wins in the purse. So if you have two options to run and you think one of these horses can win, that's a very big difference in the payday for the jockey as well. And you know what? Jockeys, even though they don't eat as much as the rest of us, they need money and they got to eat too. So, they're going to be on the horse that they think has the best chance to win. So Emily, what are your thoughts actually on Hot Rod Charlie? We didn't really get your breakdown on him. What do you think this horse can do and what are his chances?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add outside of what John said. I kind of feel the same way about him. I think distance-wise, I think there are some concerns, which makes him a little bit less exciting. But he might be, like I was saying earlier, and we just kind of look at this field, which horses are just a little bit better than the rest. That seems to give him an advantage. So where he does have those questions as far as distance, as far as being able to pass horses in the stretch, things like that. But again, it's just sort of like those questions kind of loom with others, and he might be the better of that set. He's going to be forwardly placed. He's got a rider that's sticking with him, so they're all in. They're pointing to this race. He's training well. He's going to run a good race, whether it's like a winning type race. So I'm kind of with John, and I think his line is really fair as well, 5-1.
All right, so there you go. Hot Rod Charlie, another one of those horses you guys should definitely be looking at and probably using at least in some of your exotics if you're putting some tickets together. So let's talk about the 5 horse here, Franco D'Ina. I'll say this. Most of us have been stuck in our houses for the last year or so with COVID going on. This horse has been traveling all over the world. His passport's getting punched every other week right here. But it hasn't really been all that profitable for them to be flying this horse around the world because I think he had a 6th over in Maiden. He had a 7th the last race when he came over to run in the Preakness. This is a Japanese-bred horse. Anything about this? He's the longest shot on the board right now at 30-1. So is there anything here, John, or is this just one of those horses that just doesn't factor in this race?
He's not going to win, but he factors because I think he has more speed than he's shown, right? He was really ranked in that Preakness race, and they were holding him up. I don't think they do that, on Saturday. At least I don't think so. I don't know if they actually named somebody to ride yet. That's an important thing. Because Rosario was on him in the Preakness, but I don't know who's going to be on him. Oh, yeah. I think it's Santana, Ricardo Santana. So I think this horse could factor in the pace, and that will mean something to the Sadler horse that we're going to talk about later about how this race is going to be run. So if I were them, I go right for the lead with this horse and take him as far as I can. He's not going to take him to the winner's circle, but he can factor in, and he can make things more difficult for a horse like Rock Your World.
All right, Emily, what are you thinking about with this one?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important point. It's just his factor on how he impacts the race shape. But overall, in terms of his ability to win, or even a class level or a speed level, he's way below. I mean, just kind of visually looking at the horse, he just looks a cut below this level. So I have a hard time getting to him anywhere, sticking around for a top 4 spot. But I think the point about him impacting the pace is important for the overall handicapping and pace picture.
All right, so there you go with Francisco de Ina, which I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But,
that sounds about right.
That's the way they said it when I was watching the race replay from the previous, so I'm going to go with it right there when I was doing my research. All right, so we're going to go talk about the 6th horse here in Known Agenda. This is the Florida Derby winner. Ran in the Derby. I think he finished 7th in the Derby, so, respectable, not anything that we're going to be overly excited about, but not anything I'm going to give him a huge knock for in a 20-horse field either. So Emily, we'll start with you here on Known Agenda. What are your thoughts on this one?
Actually, I'm going to pass it to John. I think he's a little bit higher on Known Agenda than I am, so I'll give him the floor. He has a little bit better opinion on this horse.
All right, the spotlight's all yours, John. What do you got?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not high on this horse, but he's just one of these horses that he's really bothers me in this race. He's a horse I have difficulty evaluating. I'm trying to think between. I think his fair value might, for me, would be anywhere between like 8 and 10 to 1. Maybe it's going to be higher on Emily's. I just don't know. Like, I have trouble with the distance. I think with this horse, I have trouble. He just seems to look like in the Derby, he got intimidated a little bit, which is a problem for me because he looked like he got a pretty decent. He had some traffic, but he had a pretty decent trip. So I just think the only thing is if that front end bunches up and he gets like kind of a clean run. All by himself as, just before the deep closers and gets kind of the first run on them, maybe, so I just don't want to toss him, but it's not a horse that I kind of really love. So I think, probably going to be leaning more like 10 to 1 as a fair value on that horse. But, that's my opinion.
All right, so
I can agree. I can agree with that in terms of fair value, but I think he's going to be a lot shorter than that because I think people are just going to be trying to look for a horse outside of essential quality, and he's kind of one of those horses that just looks a little bit safer, so to speak, right? Because he has that graded 1 win in the Florida Derby, and he has some fast speed figures, and he has the connection. So he kind of just feels like, well, if you don't like them, then you kind of have to go here. And I think that's sort of what John was saying with him. It's sort of like, I don't really know what to do with him because he's just sort of like, I don't like these others and I got to land on somebody. And I think that's where people are going to land. And my overall concern with him in this race is the same as the Derby. I didn't like the effort in the Florida Derby overall. I thought that was the right spot for him to win that race, which he did. But what he showed visually, where he was drifting out and just kind of the overall class with him, and John mentioned it too in the Derby, just kind of getting intimidated, that's a class issue. And these are tough races. This is 12 furlongs. It takes class to win. And I just don't think he stacks up on that. I think if you could make the case there for 10 to 1 for the reason that John mentioned, that maybe he just falls into a trip. And that's probably what it would take. It's just sort of the other horses don't show up, and it just kind of takes, a horse that just happens to be at the right place at the right time. So you could get a price from that perspective, but I think he's just going to be shorter than that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and again, if you're looking for multiple things to happen for this horse to win, like other horses to kind of regress and him to actually jump up and have his best day, if you're taking less than 10 to 1 on it, you're probably not getting the value that you want because you need multiple things to fall into place. Not that it can happen, but when you need a lot of moving parts to all come together in order to make this horse a winner, it's not the most likely outcome that's going to come up. So here's another horse that I had a lot of trouble with, and I need you guys to help me out with, and that's Rock Your World. Because this was a horse that was the winner of the Santa Anita Derby. A couple people really kind of liked him going into the Kentucky Derby. He had some trouble.
He was the second choice, right?
Well, a lot of people, yeah, we should say a lot of people kind of liked him. But you never know. It could have just been his owner putting a big bet on him, and that could have knocked it all down. So you don't know.
That is the Derby.
Yeah. But here's the deal. Here's the problem that I have with this horse, right? Is we see this happen sometimes, especially in the Derby. The Derby is a race that, things happen in the Derby that don't happen anywhere else. You got 20 horses. You're going to get squeezed out. People are going to have trouble. There's going to be traffic. People are going to get pushed wide. So getting a trip is something we always talk about in the Derby as, being the horse that's going to win is going to get a good trip and is not going to, get shuffled around. This horse had all kinds of problems there. So when you see that, is this one of those things where you say, you know what, I'm just going to throw that race out completely? Or is this something where you say, hey, you still got to kind of factor in the fact that, he was expected to run big and he just didn't show up on that day. So this is one of those horses that I have trouble with because, who is the real Rock Your World? Is it the guy we saw in the Santa Anita Derby, or is it the guy we saw in the Kentucky Derby where he, basically just kind of folded up there? So what are you guys looking at with this horse? Help me out here because I don't know what to do with it.
Well, I would think, the trouble in the Derby, if he was a horse that traditionally broke bad or had gait problems, I would say just more of the same. But that's not the case. He's a speed horse. He needs kind of to be forwardly placed. He needs to be on or near the lead. So he was eliminated in that race. So I would toss that Derby. In fact, I think his plot would look even better if we eliminated the Derby, which we didn't. So I think he's a horse that's going to go to the lead. I mean, that would be probably the strategy. And if he's able to not have a lot of jostling with the horse inside, I guess it's the 5 now. I was looking at an old thing.
Yeah,
Japanese horse. Yeah. If he doesn't, put any kind of pressure on him and he makes an easy lead, he's definitely a wire-to-wire candidate to win the race.
Interesting. No, Emily, you have similar thoughts on him?
I do have similar thoughts, but my problem with that is I think that's not necessarily a contrarian thought. I think that's going to be a real common thought that people are going to see him as being able to excuse the Derby, because I don't think there's many questions with people that can easily excuse that, and him going to the front and just looking at the rest of the field where there's not a lot of pace setters, especially if your only other pace setter is a horse that's just probably not a fit at this level to where he could just steal the race. And I think because of that, because of the attention that he took in the Derby, he's going to get as much in here and could be the second choice again. And then it's just a value standpoint because, the Santa Anita Derby was a good race for him. But he did have a lot of things his own way, and the track profile favored inside runners. We talked about that going into the Derby. So he's still overall as an individual, he has something to prove. So I think there's a lot of hope with him, and some of it is, it's based in fact. But then it just comes down to value, right? And I just think as a second choice, and if I kind of agree with John with the central quality being lower than 2 to 1. I don't know if Rock Your World, John. I'm curious what your line is, but even if he's 5 to 2, I don't think that's value, because even if he's a wire to wire threat, he's still going to have to go 12 furlongs. He's not a horse that necessarily, when I look at him and have been watching him train coming into this race, that stands out as like, yeah, this is a real galloping. If he gets to the front, his stamina is going to kick in late. So to me, he still has a lot of questions to where the price just probably is not going to be there with him.
Yeah, I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, he's 9 to 2 on the morning line is what they had him with. And like you said, a lot of people have been talking about him, so there's a good chance he goes off even shorter price than that.
Yeah. And, I mean, for me, I fair value would be 7 to 2 for me on him. So it's really important when you're playing horses. It's not who you like, it's who you like at what price.
Exactly.
That's the most important thing, right? So, that's what we try to do with the focus, is try to give our expert fair value, so you can kind of evaluate the horse, not just like, I got these top 4 horses could win the race, but what's a good value on a horse? When do I look at a horse to bet, versus, what his real odds are. So.
Yeah, we talked about this when we did the Derby preview as well. Is if you ask a real horse player who they like, it's the question they always ask you back is, well, what are the odds right now? Because there are definitely horses that you like, but if he's going off at too short a price, then you're not going to bet on him. And if he's going off at well above where you think he should be, or fair value as John calls it, that's where you're going to be putting your money down, because you're going to have a better chance to get a return on it than you think the market is offering you. And that's pretty much the same way in any gambling here, whether we're talking about horse racing or basketball or, baseball or whatever sport you're looking at, if you can get value on something, that's where you want to put your money down. So that takes us to the last horse in the race, the only new shooter that we have here as well, Overtook, 20-1. I think he's the second longest shot on the morning line right here. This is his first race in the Triple Crown. Didn't run in the Kentucky Derby. Didn't run in the Preakness here. He honestly didn't even win his last couple races, although he ran in the money. I think it was the Grade 3 Withers and then the Peter Pan last time out where he finished third. Is this a horse that fits here at all, or is this one of those ones that you guys were talking about that just seems to be a step below the rest in this class?
I'll take this horse. I'm actually really interested in this horse, and it's sort of one of these handicapping angles where it's kind of a process of elimination. As you can kind of maybe gather from my feelings of this field, I'm a little bit lukewarm on everybody, and so it just kind of like one by one going through the race. I mentioned it earlier, the thought of the Kentucky Derby. It typically is a race. The Kentucky Derby will produce a lot of next out winners, whether, outside of the Triple Crown, these horses run in other races, and they often come back and win, and they do so at a high percentage. And this year's Derby, it has not been the case. We saw that with the horses that faltered in the Preakness, and then there's been other horses that have come back in other overnight stakes. I think the only horse that has won is a horse called Sainthood, another Todd Fletcher horse, and he won an off the turf race. So outside of that, there hasn't been a lot of success out of the race. So I just kind of question the overall strength of the Derby versus the strength of it in previous years. And now Overtook, as you mentioned, is he a little bit below? Yes. His speed figures are slower than the other horses. So you have those horses that are just a little bit better. But the advantage that Overtook has is he's lightly raced and he's improving. And he's a horse that looks like this type of added ground is where he's going to excel. So if you just kind of project, he has a move forward. He's coming into this race the right way. He's a kind of developing type that has some stamina. I think there's upside off the trip in the Peter Pan, even though it was a third place finish. It wasn't the best case scenario for him. He was wide. John mentioned it in the notes. Stretch. He's going to get more ground. Soon after the wire, he's out in front of those other horses. So it just kind of shows, just kind of like head to head, he's competitive with these other horses. Does have to take a step forward, but as you mentioned, he's the second longest shot on this field, and that's just juicy enough to me that I'm willing to take a shot in a race that I just don't feel strong about anybody else.
All right, fair enough. John, what are your thoughts on him?
I agree 100%. Emily and I talked about this horse before this. And yeah, his Peter Pan, he, like I said, he just got the kind of look of a 1.5 mile horse, and more so than any of these horses. And you can see his speed figures, so he'll be completely, ignored probably at the window because his speed figures look slow. But if you look at his speed figures, they're incremental, right? They're kind of getting better inch by inch, and that's kind of a good thing. And with Todd Fletcher, we talked about this, I think, at the Derby. He's become more of this kind of like, developing these long distance kind of horses, both on the grass, on the dirt in recent years. He's been a little bit more patient with his horses. They haven't been as precocious. I think this horse is coming into this race the right way, and I'm going to try to make value with this horse in underneath plays with, a couple of the obvious contenders and, probably King, Essential Quality, and some of the, first and second. This horse is going to be in a lot of my trifecta and, maybe superfecta tickets if I go that route.
Interesting. All right, so those are the 8 horses that are in this race right here. Remember, if you guys want to get the breakdown of not only these horses, but all the other races that are going on, you can get over to FTN Bets. We will have the OptixEQ PDF up there probably tomorrow, right, John? You'll send that to me Friday, and we'll have that up there for everybody?
Yes, correct.
All right, so we'll have that up. Well, again, I don't know if you guys are watching this on Thursday as we record it, but, either way, it will be up there on Friday over on the PDF. One more question I want to ask you guys about this race here as well. So when we talk about playing like a pick 3, a pick 4, a pick 6 here, we talk about there are races where you want to single horses. There are races where you want to play, a wide field here. There are other races where you want to play a narrow field where there are 3 or 4 contenders that you think could actually win. So let's say you were putting together one of those tickets today. What are you looking at out of this race? Is this I would assume it's not a single race based on what we just talked about for you guys, but how deep into this race would you go? There are only 8 horses. So is this one where you would spread to 3 or 4, or do you think there's only 1 or 2 that are really worth using on those tickets? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
For me, the way I play it, again, it all depends on the other races, what's surrounding that. But probably a way I would do is I probably would key essential quality on some tickets and then have a backup ticket with pretty much, I guess I would use Rock Your World. I would use Charlie, and I would use probably maybe even on a bigger backup ticket, Overtook and Known Agenda. So it depends on what's around it and how much I want to invest. Depending on if it's a pick 6 or a pick 4, I have different strategies for those different races. But mainly, I would key essential quality and have a backup ticket.
All right. So if you're putting a ticket together, essential quality would be like your A horse, and then Charlie and Rock Your World would be your Bs, and then the other two you mentioned would be
Overtook, Cs, yeah.
Okay. Emily, pretty much similar for you?
I think I agree with John, is that you just, you have to look at the sequence. It's like if you like a lot of 20 to 1s and those all come in and then you're only alive to essential quality, you're kind of kicking yourself, So it's going to depend on the sequence and where, you would want coverage in this race, depending on those other opinions. Now, my opinions were a little bit tighter or maybe not so much value. I'm going to lean essential quality because I just think he's kind of the best of the known horses in this race. And then I'm using Overtook because he's the right price and he's just the right horse that's coming into this race that could either win or run out. So he's one of those horses that I'm kind of more, willing to mess with him on top.
All right, so there you go. And that sums it up, guys. Those are, like I said, it's going to be a little shorter than the Derby one we did because we got less than half as many horses to talk about here. But I definitely want to thank you guys, Emily and John, for coming on with us and talking here. John, give everybody a little bit of a breakdown of what you guys do at OptixEQ, where they can find you, and
Sure.
what you guys are all about here.
Yeah, so you can find us at OptixEQ.com. Again, we're a visual handicapping company. Visual, does that mean you can see in our products plots and even our notes, which we watch each of these races individually, and we do color coding on just basically the race, interpreting the races for you, so you don't have to do a lot of work. It's really good for people who don't have the time but want some expert information so they can make decisions on their own, and that's what we do. And Optics Focus is something that we've kind of just done for big days, but I think during the Saratoga Del Mar meet we'll probably roll it out on a more permanent basis. So that's, again, a great tool, especially if you're looking for what you think fair value on horses are. So that's us.
Yeah, and we will definitely talk about that as well, because we a lot of our people have been saying they really liked what they saw out of you guys and, the PDFs and stuff like that. So we'll have another talk before the summer when Saratoga and Del Mar rolls around. Maybe we could do something like this again. But Emily, go ahead. Give everybody your, your social handles, where they can find you, and anything else you want to add here before we sign off.
OptixEQ, and then we use Twitter as the primary social media right now. So that's the handle at OptixEQ on Twitter, and my personal one is Emily OptixEQ.
All right, so there you go. You guys know now where you can find them. You know where you can find the PDF, and now you have a little bit of an idea on how the Belmont Stakes is going to be run. So hopefully everybody can go out there and win some money. Remember, if you're looking for the PDF, you can get over to FTN Bets. It'll probably be available on Friday as soon as John gets it over to me and I can get it up on the site. It has a lot of good information. They break down every race on the card, not just the Belmont. It'll be all the races leading up to it as well. I'm going to tell you guys, honestly, there's probably even more value in the first couple races than there are in the Belmont here, because there's a lot of other horses running and a lot of horses that, like I said, people haven't been talking about all week. So you're not going to have the group think and everything else that goes on with these big grade 1 races that are, the Triple Crown ones that everybody is talking about here. So John, Emily, thank you very much. Like they said, make sure you guys get over to OptixEQ and check them out. Make sure you get over to Twitter and follow OptixEQ. You can follow both of them on Twitter as well. They also have a YouTube channel that has a lot of good, not only lessons and things that they're trying to teach you about horse racing, but also a lot of good information about how to use the OptixEQ plot and things along those lines. So, make you guys a better handicapper, and being a better handicapper makes you more profitable. And, being more profitable means you're going to have a better life because you're going to have more money. So if you want a better life, get over to OptixEQ, check out John and Emily and all their information, and we can go from there. Thank you guys for joining us. OptixEQ, FTN Bets, together again. Beautiful combination. Good luck, everybody.